Opposition Leader Anthony Albanese is in South Australia in the wake of the Kangaroo Island blaze. He spoke a short time ago.
Much happy to take questions.
So, as you can ask, fire brigade unions across the country have banded together calling for a royal commission into the bushfire disaster. Is that something you support?
Look, what we've said is we're very open to that. We have said in terms of priorities, in terms of timing, there hasn't yet been a meeting of COAG. And a meeting of COAG, the Prime Minister with the Premiers and Chief Ministers can actually make decisions to impact things right now. We will need a proper assessment of this, and a Royal Commission, of course, is consistent with what I've called for today. An ecological audit is something that should happen regardless of whether a Royal Commission goes ahead or not. There, of course, will be coronial inquiries as a result of the deaths that have occurred, and they will go into, as coronial inquiries do, in very detail about the circumstances behind the loss of life that has happened, and will make recommendations about how that can be potentially avoided in the future, or at least minimised those occurrences.
Should the government consider expanding its aerial firefighting fleet?
Absolutely, and we called for that. We actually had $80 million in the budget to do that. We announced that in March of 2019. I called for it in the letter that I wrote to the Prime Minister calling for COAG to meet in November. It's very clear. This is not business as usual. This is a national emergency. It's a crisis, and it needs an appropriate response.
You say you support a Royal Commission, considering a Royal Commission, but you won't say today that one definitely should occur. Is that what you're saying?
Well, my priority is to look at what can occur that can make a difference now on the ground in coming weeks and months. We're still in the midst of this crisis. The Victorian peak season hasn't begun yet. So we need to look at those measures, I believe, first, and that's why I've been arguing. I argued that COAG should meet in November to get a national response. As of Saturday, the Prime Minister agreed that there needs to be a national response. So that's my priority. A Royal Commission, of course, if it's called, won't report for many, many months, and usually it takes more than a year. If you're going to have a Royal Commission, it needs to be done properly. I think there are some obvious contenders for people who could conduct such a Royal Commission, and I have that in mind. But I would hope to get some agreement out of the government. I don't want this to be a partisan issue. Today we've announced 3 initiatives we think the government should undertake. Tomorrow we'll have shadow cabinet meeting here in Adelaide, and we'll be discussing further measures. I've asked people to come forward, such as Chris Bowen, on health. Terry's brought forward already the environmental suggestions in that area, but this will require a whole of government response.
What's Labor's climate policy?
We think climate change is real, and we think that you need to drive down emissions. You need to have a strong domestic policy. At the moment, we don't have an energy policy. We don't have a climate policy. And the other policy we have is that the government should act. I don't want to wait until after the next election for there to be some action, and at the moment you don't have that. And secondly as well, if you have strong domestic policy, you can then have credibility on the international stage. At the moment we have a circumstance whereby while these bushfires were happening, Angus Taylor was over in Madrid arguing for less action, not more.
Has this rolling crisis though changed your stance when it comes to, say, unequivocal support for the coal industry and coal exports?
Well, when have I said that?
In December.
No, I didn't say that at all. I didn't say that at all. What I said was that if you stopped coal exports immediately, then what you would have is more emissions rather than less, because the displacement would occur from other countries that have coal that emits higher greenhouse gases than the relatively better burning Australian coal. That's what I said in December. I've argued for strong domestic action. I've argued for strong international action. I've argued it since I wrote Labor's climate change policy in 2006 that I launched as the Shadow Minister with Kim Beazley. That led to the 2007 policy, which was a policy that I'm proud of, that was being implemented, that was comprehensive, recognised international action. It also had in it the renewable energy target. It had the creation of a range of agencies to support the shift to clean energy. I've been very consistent about this.
Has that stance to coal exports changed at all since this crisis began?
No, what we need is policies, not slogans. And I've been consistent about that. I continue to believe we need a strong climate change policy, not just a two-word slogan, and that is important. If you stop, if you stopped burning coal today in Australia immediately, then the lights that are running this centre would go off, because we still rely upon coal fire as well as renewable energy, even here in South Australia, that because of the former Labor government has led the way across the country. Labor will take strong action, but we won't also argue, as some would imply, that you can just flick a switch and change immediately. What you need to do is transition to a system whereby you have less emissions. You need to do that domestically, but we also need to engage internationally.
Just on the bushfire crisis, there's lots of speculation, perhaps misinformation about what's fueled these fires. How important is it that we get to the bottom of it?
Well, what we know is that the Garneau report in 2008 said that the bushfire season by 2020 would look a little bit like what we're seeing played out. We know that that report was based upon advice from the CSIRO and the science. We know that is a major factor. We know also, of course, that some human beings, for reasons beyond my comprehension, have lit fires. We also know that the drought in terms of drying up of our continent has meant that some areas, such as tropical rainforests that haven't burnt before, have burnt this time. And we know also that resources need to be allocated to national parks and other areas to make sure there is appropriate hazard reduction. We know it can be effective. I've seen firsthand in the briefings I've had at rural fire services in places like the Blue Mountains, the impact that it has had. So one of the concerns that I have is that for a while, last year, 2019, as this was building up, there was a bit of an approach from some saying, we've had natural disasters before, we'll come through this, a bit of nothing to see here. This is not business as usual. This is a national emergency. This does require a comprehensive response, and the first priority, of course, must be to protect lives, and then to protect properties and to minimise damage. But we also need to give consideration to the broader impact, the impact on the economy, the impact on our animals, which is why we're here today, the impact on our ecology, that's so important for the nature of our country, the social impact, the health impacts, which will be ongoing. This will have a very significant impact into the future. We also need to have proper assessments about whether perhaps this is more like the new norm, what we're seeing played out here. I hope that's not the case, but certainly we need better preparedness in the future.